If you have ever watched someone you love get treated like they don't matter, and had to swallow your anger because a child was watching, then you already understand the first 10 minutes of this story. And if you've ever seen an ordinary-looking stranger turn out to be someone extraordinary, stay until the end, because what happened at Gate C14 that evening is still being talked about by everyone who was there. Before we begin, if stories like this move you, hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell true-to-life stories just like this one every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. David Turner had exactly one job that day: get his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, from Denver to Charlotte in time for her mother's wedding. Not his wedding, his ex-wife's. It was a strange, tender kind of errand, the sort of thing only a father who had made peace with heartbreak could carry off with a straight face. Lily didn't fully understand what a wedding meant, only that her mom was marrying Uncle Rick, that there would be cake, and that her daddy had promised, Pinky promised, that she wouldn't miss it. David had been divorced for 3 years. It hadn't been ugly, not really, just tired. Two good people who had loved each other honestly, and then, somewhere between his 3rd deployment and her promotion to regional manager, had run out of road to walk together. What remained, against all odds, was a friendship built on their shared devotion to their daughter, and an unspoken agreement that no matter what happened between the two of them, Lily would never feel the seams. That was why David had spent his last 4 days of leave packing, repacking, and triple-checking a suitcase covered in cartoon stickers, and why he now stood in the bright, echoing terminal of Denver International Airport at 6 in the morning with a rolling suitcase in one hand and his daughter's small fingers wrapped around the other. Lily wore her favorite yellow sundress, her mother's favorite color, and clutched Mr. Buttons, a gray stuffed rabbit with one slightly chewed ear, against her chest like he was a life preserver. "Daddy, are we gonna miss it?" she asked for the 5th time since they'd left the house. "We've got hours, baby girl," David said, crouching down to tie her shoe at the security line. "Hours and hours. We're gonna get there so early, your mom's gonna wonder why we're already sitting in the front row." Lily giggled, and for a moment the tightness in David's chest, the thing he never quite named, the thing that had lived in him since he left the Air Force, eased just slightly. What almost no one at that airport knew, what Lily herself barely understood, was that her father had spent 12 years of his life making sure airplanes didn't fall out of the sky. David Turner had been a flight safety officer for the United States Air Force, the kind of job that doesn't come with parades or movies made about it, but the kind of job where a single overlooked detail, a hairline crack, a mislabeled hydraulic line, a maintenance log signed off too quickly, could cost dozens of lives. He had inspected engines in the freezing dark before dawn launches. He had grounded aircraft that generals wanted in the air. He had once stood in front of a review board and told 4 commanding officers that a squadron would not fly until a corroded fuel line was replaced, knowing it would delay a mission and knowing it was the only right answer. 18 months later, a nearly identical fuel line failed on a different aircraft from a different unit that hadn't done the inspection. 3 men didn't come home. David carried that memory the way some men carry old injuries, and quietly, permanently in the marrow. He'd left the service 4 years ago, worn down not by the danger but by the distance it put between him and his family, and now he consulted part-time for a private aviation safety firm, the kind of quiet, unglamorous work that kept airlines honest without anyone in the traveling public ever knowing his name. Today, though, he was not Inspector Turner. Today, he was just Dad, trying to get his little girl to her mother's wedding on time. They made it through security without trouble, Lily proudly placing her own sneakers in the gray bin, David folding his leather jacket over his arm. They wandered the concourse, bought a cinnamon pretzel they split between them, and arrived at Gate C14 with nearly 90 minutes to spare. Plenty of time, David thought, plenty of cushion for anything that could go wrong. He should have known better. In his experience, the moment you think you have enough cushion is exactly when the world decides to test you. The gate agent working the counter that morning was a woman named Diane Whitfield, mid-40s, her blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it might be giving her a headache, red-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose, a laminated badge swinging from a lanyard every time she moved. Diane had been having what she would later describe in a much smaller and much quieter voice as one of those mornings. A canceled connecting flight from Phoenix had dumped 40 irate passengers into her gate area needing rebooking. Her supervisor was unreachable, and corporate had just emailed a new directive about premium cabin optimization that, in practice, meant certain seats that had already been assigned to paying passengers could be reassigned to higher-tier loyalty members at the airline's discretion. David didn't know any of that when he stepped up to the counter 40 minutes before boarding to confirm his and Lily's seats, 14A and 14B, a window and aisle he had specifically requested together months ago, because Lily got anxious on planes and needed to be beside him, always, without exception. It was a small thing. It shouldn't have needed explaining. "Hi there," David said, sliding 2 boarding passes across the counter, Lily's small hand still tucked into his other palm. "I just wanted to confirm we're still together, 14A and B. She gets nervous flying, so..." Diane didn't look up right away. She was typing, frowning at her screen, the blue glow reflecting off her glasses. When she finally glanced at the passes, her expression didn't soften. "I'm showing your seats have been reassigned," she said, flat and fast, the tone of someone who has said the same sentence 40 times already that morning and has 40 more sentences to go. "You're in 22C now. Middle seat. Your daughter is in 22D. Wait, reassigned? We booked these seats months ago." David kept his voice even, the way he'd trained himself to over years of high-pressure rooms. "Is there a mistake in the system?" "No mistake," Diane said. "A Diamond Tier member needed seats for a family of 4. Our system automatically reassigns lower fare class passengers when that happens. It's in the fare rules." She said, "Fare rules the way some people say scripture," as if the phrase itself ended the conversation. David glanced down at Lily, whose grip on Mr. Buttons had tightened, her eyes flicking between her father's face and the woman behind the counter, sensing the way children always sense that something in the air had shifted. "Ma'am, I understand policy," David said, still calm, still low, "but my daughter is 7. She has anxiety when she flies and she needs to sit beside me. I'm not asking for an upgrade. I'm asking for the seats I already paid for together." "There's nothing I can do," Diane said, sliding the passes back across the counter without meeting his eyes. "You can speak to a supervisor if you'd like, but I don't expect the outcome to change." "Next in line, please." It was such a small phrase, "next in line, please," but it landed on David like a slammed door. Not because he was owed deference, not because he expected to be treated as anyone special, but because his daughter was standing right there, watching a grown man be dismissed with the exact same brisk indifference you'd use to swat away a fly. And children absorb these moments in ways adults forget. They learn what the world thinks people like their father are worth. David didn't raise his voice. He had learned long ago that raising your voice in front of your child teaches them the wrong lesson about how conflict gets solved. Instead, he knelt down, took Lily's face gently in his hands, and said, Hey, look at me. We're gonna figure this out, okay? I promise you, you and me are sitting together." "That's not changing." Lily nodded, but her lower lip was already trembling, and one fat tear slid down her cheek and dropped onto Mr. Button's worn gray fur. That tear did something to David that no chain of command, no general, no review board had ever managed to do. It cracked something open. He stood, walked Lily to the nearest row of seats, and asked a kind-faced woman nearby if she'd keep an eye on his daughter for just a moment. Then he pulled out his phone. Most people in that moment would have called an airline complaint line, or maybe posted an angry tweet destined to vanish into the algorithm within the hour. David did something different. He called a number he hadn't used in 8 months, a colleague still active in aviation oversight. Not because he wanted the airline punished. Not yet, but because something in the back of his mind, some old professional instinct, had started nagging at him the moment he'd overheard 2 gate agents murmuring near the jet bridge door about a hydraulic sensor fault that's probably nothing on the very aircraft he and Lily were about to board. He hadn't been trying to eavesdrop. It's just that 12 years of training your ears to catch the phrase "probably nothing" in an airport does not switch off simply because you've traded a flight suit for a leather jacket. Probably nothing was the exact phrase written in the maintenance log of the aircraft that had killed 3 men 11 years ago. David walked back toward the gate counter, his heart no longer pounding over a seat assignment, but over something far graver. He was no longer thinking about Lily's wedding day timeline. He was thinking about the 90-some other passengers now filing into the boarding line, chatting, sipping coffee, utterly unaware. "Excuse me," David said to Diane, his voice different now, quieter but with a gravity that made her actually look up this time. "I need to speak to your operations manager immediately. It's not about the seats." "Sir, I told you. A supervisor can review the seating issue after boarding." "It's not about the seats," David repeated. "I overheard your ground crew discussing a hydraulic sensor fault on this aircraft. I need to know if that's been formally logged and cleared, and I need to know right now, before you board a single passenger." Something in his tone, not anger, but absolute unshakable certainty, made Diane pause for the first time all morning. "Sir, who exactly are you?" David reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn leather badge holder, the kind that had traveled with him through 2 continents and a dozen bases. He flipped it open and set it on the counter, not as a threat, but as a fact. "David Turner, former U.S. Air Force flight safety officer, currently a certified aviation safety consultant, and I am telling you that if there is an unresolved hydraulic sensor fault on this airframe, this flight does not board until it's cleared by a licensed mechanic. Not a gate agent's guess, not a supervisor's convenience. A licensed mechanic." Diane's face went through several rapid transformations, disbelief, defensiveness, and finally, as the weight of what he was saying settled in, genuine alarm. I'll call operations," she stammered, reaching for her radio. "Word moves fast in an airport." Within 4 minutes, an operations manager named Carl Reyes arrived at the gate, out of breath, a tablet in hand. Within 6 minutes, Captain Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman with more flight hours than most passengers had frequent flyer miles, came striding down the jet bridge corridor, radio crackling at her hip, aviator sunglasses pushed up into her dark hair. "Talk to me," she said to David directly, ignoring the confusion of the gate staff around her, because something about the way he stood told her he was the only person in that terminal who actually knew what he was talking about. David laid it out plainly. What he'd overheard, the exact phrasing, his professional background, and, because he was a careful man, the reference numbers of 2 prior FAA service bulletins related to that specific hydraulic sensor model, numbers he happened to remember because he had, in another life, helped write the safety recommendation that led to one of those bulletins. Captain Santos didn't hesitate. She keyed her radio. "This is Captain Santos, Flight 2247. I need maintenance to re-verify sensor status on the hydraulic system before we board a single passenger." "Hold the gate. Captain, we're already behind schedule." "Corporate is going to," Carl Reyes began. "Corporate can talk to me after we know this aircraft is safe," Santos said, and something in her voice ended the argument. What happened over the next 40 minutes has since been described by passengers who filmed it from a dozen different angles as one of the strangest, most electric scenes any of them had ever witnessed in an airport. Maintenance crews in reflective vests jogged down the jet bridge. A small crowd of curious, then concerned, then quietly frightened passengers gathered near the gate, phones rising like a field of small glowing lanterns. Someone posted a live video captioned, "Airline just stopped our flight because a passenger caught a safety issue," and within 20 minutes it had thousands of views, then tens of thousands. The gate agent, who had less than an hour earlier dismissed David Turner with a flat next in line, "Please," now stood frozen near the counter, watching the very man she'd waved off become the reason an entire flight had been grounded for inspection. The mechanics found it. A faulty sensor reading, borderline but real. Exactly the pattern David had described. Not catastrophic in the next 5 minutes perhaps, but exactly the kind of small, deniable, and probably nothing flaw that, left unaddressed, becomes the first domino in an accident report nobody wants to write. The part was pulled and replaced. The flight was delayed by nearly 3 hours. Passengers grumbled about the wait, right up until word spread through the gate about why. And then, one by one, strangers began walking over to shake David's hand. Airport operations didn't stop at fixing that one plane. Because of the noise the incident generated, the viral video, the passenger accounts, a local news crew that showed up within the hour. Airport. Leadership ordered an expedited safety review of 2 other aircraft from the same maintenance. Rotation that had flagged similar sensor readings in recent weeks and been cleared without a second look. For about 90 minutes that afternoon, 3 gates in Terminal C sat idle while inspectors moved from aircraft to aircraft, and a ripple of delays spread outward until, for a stretch of the evening, that entire concourse of Denver International's Terminal C had effectively ground to a halt. Passengers waiting at gates who had no idea what had triggered it all watched flight boards flicker from on time to delayed one after another, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet chaos sat one 7-year-old girl in a yellow sundress, holding a gray stuffed rabbit, utterly unaware that her tears at a gate counter had, in a roundabout and almost unbelievable way, set the whole thing in motion. Diane Whitfield found David sitting with Lily nearly 2 hours later. In a quieter corner of the terminal, Lily finally calm again, coloring in a book a flight attendant had given her. Diane approached slowly, hands folded in front of her, the sharp professional posture from that morning replaced by something smaller, more human. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the seats. For how I treated you. I looked at you and your daughter and I saw one more problem in a bad morning. I didn't see a person. I'm sorry." David studied her for a moment. He wasn't a man who enjoyed watching people squirm, and he could see that whatever pressure this day had put on her, the exhausted supervisor, the corporate memo, 40 rebooked passengers before 8 a.m. None of it excused how she'd spoken to him. But all of it was, in its own way, human. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But do me a favor. Next time somebody's kid is standing in front of you with tears in her eyes, look at the kid before you look at the policy." Diane nodded. And to her credit, she didn't try to explain herself further. She simply reissued their seats, 14A and 14B together, exactly as they'd been booked months before, personally walked them to the front of the new boarding line, and knelt down to tell Lily how much she loved her yellow dress. By the time David and Lily finally boarded a new flight that evening, 3 hours later than planned, the story of the airport dad who grounded a plane had already been picked up by 2 local news outlets and was climbing toward 500,000 views online. David hadn't wanted any of that attention. He'd only wanted to protect 100 strangers he'd never see again, and to keep one small promise to his daughter. They landed in Charlotte just after 9 that night. Lily's mother was waiting at the gate. Her wedding had been pushed to the next morning specifically so Lily wouldn't miss it. A small mercy arranged the moment she'd heard what had happened. When Lily ran into her mother's arms, exhausted, still clutching Mr. Buttons, she said only one thing about the whole ordeal. Daddy made the airplane safe. That was all 7-year-old logic needed. But for everyone else who'd been at Gate C-14 that morning, the frightened passengers, the mechanics who found a real fault, the gate agent who learned a hard lesson about who deserves patience, and the airline executives who, within a week, quietly rewrote their seat reassignment policy for families with young children, the story meant something larger. It was a reminder that the quietest person in line, the one being brushed aside as an inconvenience, might be the very person whose knowledge, whose integrity, whose refusal to stay silent, keeps everyone else safe. In the days that followed, David found himself fielding calls he never expected. A producer from a national morning show, a reporter from an aviation trade magazine, even a stranger who turned out to be the widow of one of the 3 men who hadn't come home from that mission 11 years earlier. She told him through tears he could hear even over the phone that she'd read the story online and simply needed to say thank you, that somewhere in this strange chain of events, the same instincts that had failed to save her husband had finally, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, saved a plane full of strangers instead. David didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure there were words big enough. He simply told her that her husband's name had never left him, not once in 11 years, and that, in some quiet way, he supposed it never would. He turned down most of the interviews. He wasn't interested in being anyone's headline, but he did agree to one short conversation with the aviation trade magazine, not for himself, but because he wanted to say one thing clearly, on the record, for anyone in his old line of work who might read it, that the most dangerous phrase in aviation isn't a mechanical failure or a red warning light. It's probably nothing spoken by someone tired, someone rushed, someone who has said it so many times before that it no longer sounds like a decision. He wanted young inspectors, young mechanics, young gate agents even, to understand that the 2 words standing between routine and disaster are usually just Check again. The airline, for its part, moved quickly once the story gained traction. Within a week, seat reassignment policy was revised so that children under 12 traveling with a guardian could no longer be automatically separated for loyalty tier upgrades. Diane Whitfield kept her job. David made a point of telling operations management that he didn't want her fired, only better supported, better trained, and given fewer impossible mornings to survive alone. She sent David a handwritten note some weeks later, thanking him for that mercy and mentioning, almost as an aside, that she'd started looking a little closer at every child who came through her line since that day. David Turner never set out to shut down an airport. He only ever wanted to sit beside his daughter and keep the promise he made her. But sometimes the smallest acts of dismissal, a seat taken away, a father's concern waved off, a child's tears ignored, collide with something much bigger than anyone behind a counter could have predicted. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the quietly right thing again and again, for reasons no one around you understands, turns out to be exactly what saves the day. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who turn out to be extraordinary when it matters most. We'll see you in the next one.